Imagine this. You wake up one morning, glance at the calendar, and realize you've crossed an invisible threshold. 30. The number itself means nothing, just another rotation around the sun, yet something fundamental has shifted. The room is the same, the chipped mug, the jacket on the chair, the light crawling across the wall, but something quiet has moved inside you. Coffee tastes like a memory. The music you loved sounds practiced, hollow, like it belongs to someone else's life. The ambitions that once set your soul on fire feel like someone else's dreams. The friendships that defined your 20s dissolve into polite distance. You haven't changed your habits, your routines, your beliefs, at least not consciously, yet everything feels irrevocably different. If this resonates with you, don't look away. What you're about to discover will change how you see the rest of your life. Stay with me. What happened? You scroll past the faces, the wins, the headlines. None of it lands. Nothing is wrong, and yet nothing feels untouched. You try the old levers, work harder, plan more, promise yourself a cleaner Monday. The machine works, the soul doesn't answer. You're here, but the you that used to push from behind the eyes is standing 3 steps back, watching a life that fits perfectly and somehow doesn't fit at all. You search for answers in the usual places. Perhaps it's biology, hormones declining, metabolism slowing, the body's inevitable march toward entropy. Or maybe it's circumstance, responsibilities accumulating, possibilities narrowing, the weight of unchosen paths pressing down like psychological debris. The world offers you these explanations with confident certainty, and you accept them because they're concrete, measurable, safe. But late at night, when you're alone with your thoughts, you know these answers are incomplete. They describe the surface while something deeper churns beneath, something you can't name but can feel with disturbing clarity. The people around you sense it too, though they rarely speak of it. Your friends from college, once vibrant with possibility, now carry a peculiar exhaustion in their eyes, not from lack of sleep, but from a kind of existential fatigue. They've achieved the things they were supposed to achieve: careers, relationships, homes, identities carefully constructed over years. Yet there's a quiet desperation in their laughter, a forced quality to their contentment, as if they're all performing in a play whose script they've suddenly started questioning. Why does comfort begin to feel like a cage? Why does success taste like ashes? Why does the life you built with such determination now feel like it belongs to a stranger? Here's the paradox that nobody warned you about. The very things you spent your 20s pursuing, stability, identity, recognition, belonging, become the very things that imprison you in your 30s. The self you worked so hard to create, the persona you perfected for the world, the role you learned to play with such conviction, all of it suddenly feels like a costume you can't remove. You've become so good at being who you thought you should be that you've lost touch with who you actually are, and the terror of this realization is matched only by the terror of what it might mean to change. Carl Jung understood this crisis with prophetic precision. He didn't see the shift after 30 as a decline or a midlife crisis or a biological inevitability. He saw it as an awakening, painful, disorienting, but absolutely necessary. This is the moment most people misread. They call it laziness, burnout, poor gratitude, bad timing, but you can feel the seam, before and after. Before, you were building a self the world could use. After, you were being summoned by a self only you can meet. In the first half of life, Jung argued, we build an ego, establish ourselves in the world, create an identity that allows us to function in society. We become someone. But in the second half of life, everything inverts. The task is no longer to build, but to dismantle. Not to become, but to discover. Not to achieve, but to integrate. The personality structures that served you perfectly in your 20s, the ambition, the adaptability, the hunger for external validation, become psychological prisons in your 30s. You stand at a threshold, feeling the ground shift beneath everything you thought was solid.
The old motivations don't work anymore. The old pleasures don't satisfy. The old version of yourself watches from a distance, growing smaller in the rearview mirror, while ahead lies territory you don't recognize and aren't sure you want to explore. This is not failure, Jung believed. It's invitation, the hour when the laws of the morning stop working and a second life begins. The question isn't whether you've changed, the question is whether you have the courage to acknowledge what you're becoming and what that means you must leave behind. Will you keep performing the life that proved you, or turn toward the life that reveals you? But before we can understand the path forward, we must first excavate the hidden forces that brought you to this precise moment of crisis. Because what you're experiencing isn't random, it's the inevitable consequence of a psychological architecture that was always destined to collapse.
You cross it without noticing. There is no sound, no ceremony, no line drawn across the floor of your life. One day you are still climbing, measuring time in goals, numbers, promises. And then, almost imperceptibly, the direction changes. The climb turns into a descent. Not of failure, but of gravity, a pull back toward yourself. Carl Jung called this the transition from the morning of life to its afternoon. In the morning, the task is expansion, building identity, proving worth, planting flags in the outer world. In the afternoon, the task is inversion, gathering what was scattered, finding the self that achievement concealed. Most people, Jung said, cross this threshold unknowingly. They keep walking with the momentum of their youth, dragging the same ambitions into terrain that no longer welcomes them. Whoever carries the law of the morning into the afternoon, Jung warned, must pay for it with damage to the soul. You can feel that damage in subtle ways. The success that no longer satisfies, the relationship that feels practiced, the hunger for new beginnings that refuse to begin. It's not depression, it's dissonance. The outer story continues, polished and intact, but the inner narrator has gone silent. In your 20s, you are taught to reach outward, to conquer, connect, accumulate. After 30, the soul begins whispering the opposite command, turn inward. Yet the world still demands the morning law, more growth, more proof, more motion. So you obey both masters and wonder why you feel split in two. The first half of life begins like a sunrise, glowing, restless, full of movement. You wake each day with a forward pull, chasing the shimmer of what could be. Everything feels possible because it still is. The world calls for conquest, for you to become someone. Jung called this period the morning of life, the season of expansion. It's when the psyche builds its scaffolding, identity, ambition, the sense of I. You learn the rules of the external world, how to impress, attract, belong. You sharpen your edges to fit the shape the world rewards, and the more you fit, the more you forget. Jung called this public mask the persona, the face you craft to meet the demands of others. At first it feels natural. It gives you access, confidence, love. You wear it to job interviews, to dinner tables, even to mirrors. It's not deception, it's survival. The child cannot enter the world undefended, so we learn early to trade authenticity for approval. In your 20s, the mask works perfectly. The game of becoming feels righteous. Promotions, degrees, relationships, all serve the mission of expansion. The world applauds, and the applause becomes proof that you're doing it right. You build taller, run faster, and call it growth. But hidden beneath the celebration is a quiet exchange. Every time the outer life grows stronger, the inner life grows quieter. The persona expands, the soul retreats. You start to confuse who you are with what you do, and the praise that once felt electric begins to sound like static.
Jung warned that the first half of life is necessary. It teaches us to stand, to strive, to build, but it also plants the seeds of our eventual crisis. Because what we build to survive, we later mistake for who we are. And when you reach your 30s, that structure begins to tremble. The goals achieved no longer refill the soul. The applause echoes through a hollow room. The mask that once gave you access starts to feel like armor you can't remove. You've spent years constructing a self the world could use, but one day you look around and realize the self you built for survival has quietly become the prison that suffocates you. So many men, Jung wrote, are nothing more than the decorum accorded them by society. Underneath the padding, one would find a very pitiable little creature. You feel that creature stirring now, the one behind the job title, the relationship status, the carefully curated confidence. It starts whispering in moments of exhaustion, at the desk long after sunset, in the silence after a party. It asks questions you can't silence anymore. Who am I when I'm not performing? What remains when the applause ends? At first, you call it burnout. You try new routines, new diets, new goals. But the deeper truth refuses substitution. The mask that once earned you belonging now costs you authenticity. The system you built for validation no longer feeds you, it drains you. You may look successful, the archetype of the winner, but inside, something is dying from starvation. And that something is the part of you that was always real.
The laughter feels practiced, the achievements hollow, the mirror foreign. It's the paradox of the successful but hollow life, outwardly complete, inwardly collapsing. You've spent years becoming visible to others, but invisible to yourself. And though this unraveling feels like loss, it is the soul's quiet rebellion against imitation. Listen closely. The signals are small and precise. The laugh you don't recognize, the party you leave earlier, the book that won't let you skim, the quiet that doesn't feel empty anymore. The world hasn't shifted. You have. The center has moved from them to truth, from applause to alignment, from getting ahead to going inward. When the mask begins to crack, something extraordinary happens, not outside you, but within. You start to hear a sound that has been playing beneath the noise of your life all along, a low, steady drum beat. Robert Johnson and Jerry Rule called it the drum beat in the back of your head. It's the rhythm of your unlived life, all that you could have been, said, created, loved, but didn't. You begin to sense the weight of choices unmade, of talents buried under practicality. The painter who became an accountant, the dreamer who chose safety, the child who loved stories but grew up to manage spreadsheets. At first, this awareness feels like regret, sharp and humiliating, but stay with it long enough and it begins to change shape. You realize that what you've buried isn't lost, it's waiting. Carl Jung believed that the first half of life is about building a self, but the second half is about meeting the parts of you that were left behind in the process. He called this journey individuation, the movement toward psychological wholeness. What youth found and must find outside, Jung wrote, the man of life's afternoon must find within. The unlived life is not fantasy, it's potential that your earlier self couldn't yet handle. In youth, we chase what the world calls success. We need that to survive. But in the afternoon of life, survival isn't enough. The soul wants integration. It wants to gather all the scattered fragments and say, you belong too. You start noticing flickers of your unlived self everywhere. The book you never finished, the silence that feels peaceful instead of empty, the conversations that drain you because they orbit around who you no longer are. And in quiet moments, you catch glimpses of the person you were meant to become, the one you postponed in the name of being realistic.
This realization can feel like mourning. You grieve the time wasted, the versions of yourself you abandoned. But it is also the first breath of renewal. Because now you see that it was never too late. You just had to reach the age when the noise outside grew quiet enough to hear your own echo. Here's what the culture won't tell you. This crisis is not a malfunction. It's your psyche's immune system fighting back against a life that has become toxic to your soul. Every restless night, every moment of inexplicable sadness, every flash of anger at your own routine, these are not symptoms of weakness. They are the body's refusal to continue the performance. The world teaches you that adaptation equals health, but Jung knew that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stop adapting. Stop bending yourself into shapes that earn approval but cost you integrity. The anxiety you feel isn't irrational. It's your nervous system screaming that something essential is being sacrificed. You've been living in a constant state of what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the psychological tension of holding two contradictory truths simultaneously. You believe you should be grateful for what you've achieved, yet you feel increasingly hollow. You believe you're on the right path, yet every step feels heavier. You believe this is who you are, yet the face in the mirror grows more unfamiliar each day. The unseen consequence of carrying the morning's law into the afternoon is not just unhappiness, it's a slow death of the authentic self. The part of you that knows truth from performance begins to atrophy. You become fluent in a language that isn't yours, living in a story someone else wrote, chasing achievements that feed everyone except the one person who matters, the you beneath all the constructions. And the most dangerous part? You can sustain this for years, decades even. The human capacity for self-deception is vast. You can convince yourself that the numbness is maturity, that the resignation is wisdom, that the quiet desperation is simply adulthood. But your body keeps the score. The tension in your jaw, the exhaustion that sleep doesn't cure, the vague sense that you're living at half speed, watching your own life through glass. This is the inheritance of a life unlived, not in some dramatic all-or-nothing sense, but in the thousand small ways you learned to silence what was true in favor of what was acceptable.
The restlessness is not punishment, it's a knock. It asks, will you keep performing the life that proved you, or turn toward the life that reveals you? This is where your second life actually starts, not with a grand announcement, but with a subtle betrayal of your old momentum. Cross this threshold and you don't become someone else. You become the one who has been waiting in the wings while you survived Act 1. The rebellion begins not with action, but with permission. Permission to stop. Permission to question. Permission to let the mask crack without rushing to repair it. Jung compared this collapse to sunset, a beautiful surrender, not a failure. The light dims not because it's dying, but because it's preparing to illuminate itself. The collapse is not destruction, it's an opening, a rupture through which truth can finally enter. When the persona fractures, the authentic self begins to breathe. You realize you've spent years becoming visible to others, but invisible to yourself. And though this unraveling feels like loss, it is the soul's quiet rebellion against imitation. The sunset is not the end of light, it's the moment it turns inward to illuminate the life you were meant to live. So the first act of rebellion is simple but radical. Stop optimizing. Stop trying to fix yourself as if you're a machine that's malfunctioning. The productivity hacks, the morning routines, the relentless self-improvement, these are often just new masks, shinier versions of the same performance. The rebellion asks you to do something your entire adult life has trained you to resist. Be still. Listen. Let the questions come without scrambling for answers. Jung believed the afternoon of life does not ask you to run faster. It asks you to turn and face the door that's been open the whole time.
Step through, and the familiar becomes real again. But stepping through requires letting go of the maps you've been following, the ones drawn by parents, teachers, society, the unspoken checklist of success. The compass has changed hands. Now it points inward, toward what feels authentic, not impressive, toward simplicity, not spectacle. This shift is disorienting because you've spent decades learning to navigate by external coordinates. Suddenly, you're being asked to trust an internal compass you barely recognize. Here's what this looks like in practice. You start saying no to things that once seemed mandatory. The networking event that drains you, the friendship that's become performative, the career trajectory that looks right on paper but feels wrong in your body. Each no feels like a small death, and in a way it is. You're killing off the version of yourself that needed approval more than truth. You begin to crave peace more than power, understanding more than achievement. The need to prove starts dissolving into the need to know. And the questions change. Not how do I get ahead, but what's worth giving my life to. Not how do I look to others, but what feels true when no one's watching. The unlived life is not a burden to erase, it's an inheritance to claim. The dreams you set aside were never failures, they were promises deferred until your soul was ready to live them truthfully. This is where the second life truly begins, not by reinventing yourself, but by retrieving everything you left behind on the road to becoming who you were told to be. The rebellion also means befriending your contradictions. For years, you've tried to be consistent, coherent, the same person in every room. But Jung understood that wholeness doesn't mean unity, it means integration. You contain multitudes, the ambitious and the contemplative, the social and the solitary, the confident and the uncertain. The rebellion is allowing all of these to exist simultaneously without forcing them into a false harmony. You realize meaning doesn't appear when life becomes perfect. It appears when you stop performing and start listening. For years, you were guided by maps drawn by others, but the search for meaning isn't about retreating from the world. It's about meeting it from a deeper place. You still work, love, and create, but the motive shifts. You no longer climb to prove you're enough. You build because creation itself feels alive. And the more you follow that compass, the more the world begins to respond, not with applause, but with peace. Meaning, you learn, isn't something you find, it's something that finds you the moment you stop running from where you already are.
When you finally stop chasing the horizon, you begin to hear what silence has been trying to say. It no longer feels like emptiness, it feels like presence. The solitude that once frightened you becomes a kind of classroom. The noise of the world fades, and in that quiet, you begin to learn what can't be taught. Wisdom, Jung believed, is not gathered from books or lectures. It is carved from contradiction, from living through what your mind couldn't understand until your heart did. It grows in the spaces where logic failed and life stepped in to teach you, gently, sometimes brutally. Heraclitus once said, "Men who love wisdom must be good inquirers into many things." Jung would have agreed, because wisdom isn't a theory, it's an openness to being reshaped by experience. It comes from letting every joy and every wound have its say, not silencing them, but integrating them. By now, you've met enough of yourself to know that perfection is a myth. The mistakes, the regrets, the unlived paths, they aren't stains on your story, they are the texture of it. You begin to understand that life was never asking you to win, only to pay attention. And that attention, offered fully, becomes wisdom. The old archetypes appear again, the mentor, the hermit, the sage, not as distant ideals, but as reflections of who you're becoming. Their stillness isn't weakness, it's mastery. They no longer seek control, they seek understanding, and in that understanding there is freedom.
You start finding beauty in simplicity, in slow mornings, honest conversations, the unguarded moments when you feel connected to something eternal. You realize that wisdom doesn't arrive with age, it arrives with acceptance. And the deepest kind of intelligence is not knowing more, but needing less. The chase for meaning ends here, not with an answer, but with awareness. You've stopped demanding that life explain itself because you finally trust that every silence, every loss, every turning of the seasons was already part of the lesson. Eventually, even meaning begins to point beyond itself. You start to sense the quiet horizon that no ambition can cross. The presence of mortality, not as terror, but as truth. Carl Jung wrote, "Death is not an end, but a goal." He believed that every life, if lived consciously, is a preparation for that final transition. And the fear of death, he said, is not really fear of dying, it's fear of having lived without meaning. In the first half of life, death feels like the enemy, a shadow that steals time, a clock you can't silence. So we run faster, consume more, cling harder, as if the right achievements could buy us eternity. But Jung saw this resistance as the greatest mistake. He called it a refusal of life's rhythm, the ego fighting the current that was always meant to carry it home. As the second life unfolds, the fear begins to soften. You stop seeing death as something waiting at the end and start sensing it as something walking beside you, a reminder that every day counts precisely because it ends. You notice the finite beauty of everything, a conversation you'll never have again, a morning light that will never repeat, a face you'll one day only remember. This awareness doesn't darken you, it deepens you. It replaces panic with presence. You begin to live more fully because you've stopped pretending you have forever. Death, Jung believed, completes the psyche's cycle, the outer journey returning to its source. And to approach it consciously, with openness and gratitude, is to participate in the mystery of life rather than resist it. To see death not as the thief of meaning, but as its guardian, because only what ends teaches us what mattered. Only what passes reminds us what was real. When you make peace with that truth, you stop running from life and start walking with it, one sacred temporary step at a time. The journey that began with confusion ends not in clarity, but in quiet acceptance. You no longer need the world to confirm who you are. You no longer chase the mornings that once defined you. You have learned to live in the slow radiance of the afternoon, a light that no longer blinds, but warms. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that is what this second life has been asking of you all along. Not to build, but to become. Not to strive, but to see. To gather every version of yourself, the dreamer, the achiever, the lost, the awakened, and invite them all to sit at the same table. This is what wholeness feels like, not perfection, but inclusion. Every failure, every fear, every regret now belongs. They are no longer enemies, they are teachers. The noise that once demanded proof has softened into understanding. You see that even the detours were directions in disguise. The morning of life was about movement, the afternoon is about meaning, and the sunset, the place you once feared, is not darkness, but transformation. The light doesn't disappear, it changes direction, turning inward to illuminate everything it once overlooked. The self you built for survival has become transparent. Now you can see through it, past it, into something infinite. You recognize that there was never a finish line to reach, only a home to return to. You do not lose yourself after 30. You meet the one who's been waiting behind the noise, patient, timeless, unshaken. The world outside may grow dim, but within you something eternal has begun to glow. This is not the end of youth, it is the beginning of consciousness. And in that stillness, you realize the afternoon of life was never a descent, but a homecoming to who you were always meant to be. The person you spent your 20s building was necessary. The mask you wore, the ambitions you chased, the approval you sought, these were not mistakes, they were the scaffolding. But scaffolding, by design, is temporary. It holds you up while the real structure takes shape beneath. And when the time comes, it must be removed so you can see what you've actually built. What you're experiencing after 30 isn't collapse, it's revelation. The scaffolding is coming down, and for the first time, you can see the architecture of your actual self, the one that was there all along, waiting patiently beneath the performance. This is the ultimate truth Jung spent his life trying to articulate. You are not discovering a new self, you are remembering an old one, the self that existed before the world taught you who to be, the self that watched quietly while you learned to survive, the self that never left even when you forgot it was there. Everything feels different after 30 because you are different, not broken, not diminished, not lost, but awake. The restlessness, the questioning, the quiet rebellion against the life that once fit so perfectly, these are not signs of crisis, they are signs of consciousness breaking through. You don't lose yourself after 30, you meet the one who's been waiting for you all along. And that meeting, that homecoming, is not the end of your story, it's the beginning of the one that was always meant to be told.